Friday morning, April 17th. Um, Moving right through the month of April pretty impressively. Um, on our end, on our family side, definitely very much in the shelter-in-place mode, still not getting out, still not seeing folks other than our core family of 4 people. Um, I'm honored. I think my dad is actually on the call today. I haven't been able to see him, even though he lives 40 minutes from us. So it's, we're all, still doing our shelter in place alone time, still getting out to nature, still hiking. That's been great. We again live close to nature and able to access that from our house. So that's been a real gift. So definitely glad that you're all here with us again today. Excited. We're going to go through our normal format. Dr. Ramsey Asfour will give us a short update on the state of affairs with regards to the data and the medical side, and also touch today on a little bit of some of the themes that are developing around how and when to start reopening and what that's going to look like. And Lindsay will give us a talk on the nutrition side, and Valerie's here again with us today to do some mindfulness exercises. One workflow piece, it did seem to us that the breakout rooms were not really a big priority for folks. We did see a big drop off with attendance during the webinar when we went to the breakout room and back. So we're just going to stay together as a group today and not do the breakout rooms. There will be an opportunity during the second half of the lecture of the content. If people want to pipe in and want to speak and share, Valerie will give us all space to do that, and that way we'll sort of approximate some of that ability to connect and communicate and be in this together. So with that, Ramsey, if you want to go ahead, we'll get started.
Sure. Hi, everybody. And there we go. So I put together a little bit of background as usual, just to keep things consistent, looking at where we are. Again, with the Hopkins tracker, the interesting thing this week is they added the US specific tracker and top cases by county, and all of these counties, these are some of the boroughs of New York City, Nassau, Bronx, Suffolk. So really looking at the United States as a whole, this is by county, so the county is either red or not colored, but most of the bigger population centers are quite affected. You can see around Colorado, even in Texas. And what we're learning is that we finally had some cases in California and some of the smaller counties, which are not yet red, but so we've been seeing more activity moving to rural areas. So it's quite widespread throughout the country. And looking at the curve, we are hopefully 7 days since the peak nationwide. And looking at New York, which is always sort of the one of the most hardest hit areas. So is Michigan, by the way, especially around Detroit. But so you have, they exceeded capacity. If you look at all beds, they've exceeded capacity of all beds, and certainly ICU beds, they've way exceeded capacity, and they're using ancillary facilities, as you might have heard. So we can also take a peek at California, for example, where we are not even close to full capacity, but this is total beds. Remember that lots of those beds are in rural areas where they might not have the staffing to take care. Even with ventilators, however, California might need more, but we are doing pretty good. You probably heard that Elon Musk delivered some ventilators that were actually non-invasive ventilators. They're not true ventilators to some hospitals, to my understanding. I'm not sure if those were made at the Tesla factory or not, but it sounds exciting that a lot of people are helping. This is just showing you that in what Governor Gavin Newsom said in California, one of the criteria for reopening the state, and we'll talk about that later again, is having some kind of electronic means of tracking. And this is one of those potential means. A lot of work going on in that space, as you've probably heard. We've heard a lot of politics, and I don't mean to interject too many politics, but I want, just like in medicine, we need to keep track of people's chronic conditions. We need to keep track of what's actually happening for other parameters in government. For example, allowing more mercury and other pollutants into the air is happening now. Trump is taking advantage of the situation to roll back regulations on pollution. So keep these things in mind, that we need to come together and take the good out of what's happening here and keep our eye on other things in our own lives. But this affects our lives. In fact, mercury toxicity and particulate toxicity particularly is related to risk of COVID, so infection. So cutting these regulations will increase the risk of COVID. So I'd like to see what the other side thinks, and not to be political again, but this week we've had the fighting between Trump and Governor Cuomo, and I wanted to see what Fox's News opinion is there. There's some interesting articles there, actually, if you'd want to take a look. Also on Saturday, the IDSA, I know not the friend of all of our Lyme patients for sure, but did release guidelines on COVID-19, which were relatively conservative as expected, but they basically took the stance that treatment is not recommended outside of a clinical trial because of risk factors that I'll go into in a little bit. And that treatment includes lopinavir ritonavir, which is the HIV drug known as Kaletra, hydroxychloroquine, plus or minus azithromycin. I'll go into detail here a little bit. Two studies describe significant QT prolongation, which is a cardiac arrhythmia risk in patients treated, resulting in discontinuation, and they have a high risk of arrhythmias and cardiac heart rhythm abnormalities. So that's a problem, especially in patients with kidney issues. And then their panel reached the conclusion that because of uncertainty regarding its risks and benefits, it should be used in the context of a clinical trial. And same thing with the combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. So it's not without, we've pulled back. A lot of people managing patients in the hospital, including myself, have pulled back on using hydroxychloroquine in the past week because of emerging data suggesting that it may not be beneficial. So the data, looking at the date here, April 4th, this is a report. And again, this is preliminary, not peer-reviewed. So looking at a report that the data suggests that hydroxychloroquine could shorten recovery time and fever. Again, it's preliminary data. So it's all over the map, is kind of what I'm trying to say. And then hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin treatment together. This is a French study, and they showed that it was significantly associated with viral load reduction and disappearance. So that means less virus in patients, and its effect was reinforced by azithromycin. This was a non-randomized trial. Okay, so again, confusing. So here we have a study, and this is a preprint. Again, this is the same group in France now saying that no evidence of clinical evidency of hydroxychloroquine in patients hospitalized for COVID-19 infection with oxygen requirement. So they, in fact, found that there were 8 patients receiving hydroxychloroquine, that's almost 10%, experienced electrocardiogram, so cardiac arrhythm risk or abnormalities that were significant enough that they had to discontinue it. These results do not support the use of hydroxychloroquine in patients hospitalized. So it's controversial. There's a study on Zika virus and hydroxychloroquine, that show that while it's effective in vitro, it might actually be harmful in patients. So we can't necessarily say that because it works in the lab, it's going to be helpful in the patient without a clinical trial. And so I know we're all rushing. And so here's another French study. Again, the same group, no evidence of rapid antiviral clearance or clinical benefit. So this one also added clearance with the combination of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin in severe infection. So for some reason, it's working in the lab, but it's not working in humans, at least not in these two studies, even though they're preliminary. At least this one was a letter to the editor. Again, not fully peer-reviewed, but you'll recall that the original French study was withdrawn because of inappropriate data analysis. So we don't know if there is a significant benefit yet. I was going to skip ahead. Somebody asked a lot about ventilator management in COVID. That's a topic that's probably too complex to discuss here, but I just want to chat a little bit about what we're seeing in the hospitals is that when we, and what we're hearing reported. So again, this is not great data, but there's a couple of unique things about coronavirus infection. One of them is about blood clotting, and patients that are severely ill seem to get a lot of blood clots. And we are thinking, again, without placebo-controlled trials, but we're finding blood clots in some of these patients. So we're having to give them blood thinners, and we're finding that that might be helpful. We don't know for sure, but that's also maybe one of the mechanisms of lung injury, is that you're getting clots in the small blood vessels in the lungs, and that will, blood clots there will prevent the transfer of oxygen from the air sacs into the blood cells, into the blood vessels. So that's something that people are trying to develop new ventilator strategies to manage. There's some controversy about an Italian physician that recommends a different ventilator strategy than another. These are evolving issues. We don't really know, but what we do think is that we call this prone ventilation. Normally when somebody's in the hospital, you lay them on their back and they're on their back the whole time. Well, that gets tiring, and a lot of other reasons isn't great. But when you have a ventilator tube going in there, in their mouth, then it's much better to have them on their back in terms of controlling that tube, because if that tube moves in and out, it could go out of place, and then you'll have problems ventilating or letting the patient breathe and get enough oxygen with the machine. So, but we've found that proning people, in medical terms, that means turning them on their belly, has been helpful. And there's special beds that can do that are very expensive and challenging to use. But there's also physical therapists. So at two of the hospitals I'm connected with, we've developed, or the physical therapy team has stepped up to the plate and developed protocols for turning patients on their belly. And that seems to help a lot with their oxygenation. And even in patients who don't need oxygen, who are somewhat short of breath from this disease, turning them on their belly seems to help. That doesn't seem, to my knowledge, I'm not a critical care or pulmonologist, but we haven't found that to be beneficial in mild influenza. But in severe influenza infection, for example, we do flip them on their bellies in the hospitals sometimes. So I'd like to segue for a second into reopening and how we can reopen. You've heard about what probably Governor Newsom said, and so he's listing a few criteria and different phases. He didn't say that we can reopen yet, but he said we can stay home, should expect to stay home through May, okay? And we are well below hospital capacity now. In fact, hospitals are wanting to reopen for elective surgeries because they're losing money. Hospitals don't make money when they have to pay their staff and the facility is empty or not full. And so that's a concern on our hospital systems, and we don't want, especially some of our smaller hospitals, to go under. But the criteria for reopening remain a little bit vague. those are being worked on as we speak. Some places, for example, schools might require documented plans submitted to the local health department or to the state, and businesses as well. They might require a plan to be submitted and reviewed. So there are there's a lot of moving parts here. We're all anxious to get back to business, to get working, get back to life as normal, but life is not going to be normal. The 6 counties in the Bay Area are going to release mandatory masking guidelines. I'm expecting that to be basically all parts of the Bay Area. Anytime you're in public, wear a mask. I think that's very good. That's going to keep the sick people wearing masks and not spreading as many germs, and also help the people that are not sick to not acquire infection. So these are restrictions that are going to be carried over into the workplace when certain events open. I'm expecting no large gatherings through this year. So maybe this time next year, we can have a basketball game with an audience. So I don't know what the sports teams themselves are looking at, but they're probably looking at playing without an audience. And I think it's going to be a major change. We're looking at opening up some more, as many facilities as we can, as safely. And it's going to be a back and forth game. We're going to have a spike in disease, and we're going to have to reinstitute some regulations or restrictions that we had removed, and and then it's going to be a back and forth thing. Hopefully, not too much back and forth. And I think this is all going to be tied to hospital bed capacity. So that's in a nutshell where I see things at this point. So again, taking medications such as hydroxychloroquine, probably not helpful. There are 2 great studies on prophylaxis. Again, we're waiting for data on seroprevalence. We're waiting on more lab capacity and testing kits. All of these are in short supply. We're also hearing about many more nursing home outbreaks, which could spill over into our hospitals and make us reach our capacity or even exceed it. So we're not out of the danger zone. We're moving in a positive direction. So I want people to keep their minds on that positivity as we're going forward. But it's going to be with us at least for another year, is my prediction, that we're going to be battling this infections for quite some time. So let's open it up to questions and see what people have.
Thank you, Ramsey. And I have a quick question. What's your current understanding of the state of the testing? I know that that's still pretty lacking in terms of a global ability to test everybody. There's certain countries in Europe that are basically just testing every single person in the population. Germany is way ahead of the curve on that, and that's like a PCR nasal swab test. But where are we at? I'm still actually personally confused on this, sort of rush to there's a lot of companies that have got early approval and they have an antibody test that's come to market, but there's still a real mix as to how accurate these tests are. We talk about sensitivity and specificity of testing. What are the chances that a positive test is accurate? What are the chances that a negative test is accurate? Do you have any sense of a blood test that is more accurate than others, or do we have a preferred lab for that yet?
Well, I would advise that there are some really good tests coming out to the market and some ones that are probably not so good. So this site here, as you can see, is fda.gov medical devices. But if you just Google search, as I did, FDA EUA, emergency use authorization, you'll see a list of labs and tests that at least have a registration with the FDA. So if the test is one of these, I would feel more comfortable using it. 2 days ago, there was only one antibody test on this, for example. Now I see, just looking at it today, Mount Sinai has their IgG antibody test. ChemBio now has IgG, IgM. That doesn't mean that tests are FDA approved. This means that they've at least done the paperwork and filed an emergency use authorization and promised to provide the FDA more data. So they've registered their test. I think you can have a little bit more confidence in a test that's on this list than a test that's not. In terms of, here's another one, Celex, they were the first company to come out with a test that was registered that has an emergency use authorization. So most of these tests here are actually looking for the virus themselves, so the virus itself. So you will notice that these tests will tell you that you're sick, you're actually infected currently. An antibody test, as we discussed last week, will not give you that information. It'll tell you that you probably have antibodies and not necessarily that those antibodies are protective.
Mm-hmm. And is there any availability for the mainstream population yet? For example, through LabCorp or Quest, which are local labs, we can access and test through in Marin and in Sonoma and East Bay, et cetera?
Right, not yet. So,
yeah.
So the LabCorp and Quest does not yet have those tests. I would expect by mid-May, they will have them in place and be ready to roll with them. I've been talking to some labs, smaller regional labs, not LabCorp and Quest, about their implementation plans. I'm assuming that the big boys will have that test available.
I would assume so as well. I mean, because
Yes,
we've had, you and I have talked about this, and we've even ordered some kits to bring in and give to patients. There's a company called Ray Biotech who, was one of the early to market folks. They have a test that you can it's a cassette, it's a rapid test. You can either do a blood draw and drop a few drops of blood into the cassette, or you can actually do a finger stick and drop a few drops of blood into the cassette, which is convenient because even though technically you're not supposed to let the patient do it at home, we have been able, done that and, walked them through it and then, read a picture of the test and give them you and I had a shared patient on that. But, and they ran a couple of tests simultaneously, but it almost looked like either, it was working or else it was almost broken because there was one band that was just kind of blown out and, it was much larger than expected. It almost looked as if there was just a defect in the kit itself.
I mean, these tests are, while it seems logical to do them at home, if you haven't done 200 or 300 of them, then you don't, it becomes a little bit tricky to interpret. And the FDA actually, for these kinds of tests, they have to have something called a CLIA certification to do a lot of them. And that means that, or a CLIA waiver. And the only way to do a test, for example, in our offices would be if we applied for a CLIA waiver. We could get that, but that's time consuming, tricky, and not super practical. But these tests are somewhat challenging to interpret. I've done hundreds of those tests, in my training, and actually in Ethiopia, a big project doing those kinds of tests for looking for other diseases like leishmania and HIV and hepatitis. And so I've got a lot of experience in interpreting those kinds of tests, but still, and that test is not on this list.
Interesting.
Is another thing. So you've got to be a little bit suspect because it's not that hard to get the test on the list. So I'm not saying that it's not a good test. I don't mean to insinuate that. I'm just saying that I have a little bit more confidence were it on the test.
No, I agree, and I think it's hard on our end as the treating physicians to, because for the testing companies, it's almost like a gold rush. Like, let's get out there as fast as we can. Let's get a test to market. Let's get our name recognition out there. Let's get people using our product. And it's not clear how good quality it is. So, it is nice to have some degree of vetting and at least a process to follow as they're trying to get that approval. It's just a very tricky time on so many levels.
Absolutely. Somebody's asking, when do I expect labs to be open for doing, or when should you go to a lab for a test? My bias has been if you need the test, if you're, for example, if I'm treating you with antibiotics, I want that monthly lab test to make sure that we're not causing any harm. So, you know, wear a mask, go to Quest. Quest and LabCorp are not testing uh, sick. They're not testing for COVID at their draw centers. So I don't think, so there's not necessarily a very high risk. So if you're wearing a mask and you, maybe if you change your clothes when you go home, that's, you know, a reasonable, even take a shower if you're concerned, that's a reasonable approach. And I think sometimes we don't want to cause more harm. Other elective tests, so we're having, the state is having a call on Tuesday, and that's probably going to be the big topic on that call with the California State Department of Public Health to discuss opening, you know, elective procedures, and hospitals are anxious to do that. So I think that in certain areas, I think it'll be a you know, local area by local area kind of a decision where we're going to allow procedures to be uh, to be done. Somebody mentioned that Quest is receiving COVID specimens. Yes, they are, but uh, they're not receiving those specimens in their draw centers. So you can't go to a Quest lab and perhaps you can drop off a specimen, but they're not testing you there for COVID. So we don't expect that many people with COVID to be there. Um, and and so somebody's also saying, seems like guidelines for reopening are geared towards hospital capacity rather than protecting individuals. How should someone whose immune system is compromised behave? Okay, so we're learning a little bit more about this. It seems that, and I didn't show studies about this, but obesity is emerging as a major risk factor for COVID-19, which we weren't aware of from the Chinese data. But in the American data, that seems, well, we have more obese people here, that's for sure. So it seems that that is a major risk factor. So this is observational data, but you know, some people are reporting that obese people are sicker, especially younger obese people. So that's a risk factor. But interestingly, asthma may not be as much of a risk factor as we think. So, uh,
Interesting.
so that's a positive spin. So if you have asthma, it's not necessarily a higher risk for COVID-19 disease, which is excellent. So you know, it's a moving target, and it's dizzying trying to keep track of all of this. So we're at the stage now in hospitals we're saying, okay, hold on, calm down. At first, everybody wanted to throw the kitchen sink at every patient, but now we're saying, let's do no harm. Let's see what, if we're going to do something, let's do it in this context of a study so we can actually know if it's helping or hurting. Obviously, anecdotal data is, you know, is helpful for the first stages, but now we're beyond the first stages. So let's do things that are evidence-based. Somebody had a question with vitamin C. So high-dose vitamin C is undergoing a double-blind placebo randomized controlled trial for COVID-19, which is great. And there's some data is emerging that it seems to be helpful. And so they're using intravenous vitamin C in some hospitals in New York City in this study. And we'll see what the data shows. It's certainly reasonable to take some vitamin C.
Yeah, I agree with that recommendation. And I think a general good dose range is around 500 to 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C on a daily basis. And, you know, you can certainly ramp that up if you start getting sick. There's a lot of just excellent support in the research literature around vitamin C and immune system, and also a lot of different inflammatory pathways. So we think this might help that secondary cytokine phase as well. I think we talked about it in the last week or two, but if you take too high of a dose of vitamin C, you're going to get loose stool, and that's you know, so a signal to back down. And then I think a general ascorbic acid supplement is fine. Um, However, if you are sensitive to ingredients like corn, or you're doing a strict paleo template diet, it is important to note that a lot of the vitamin C that's on the market is from a corn source. And so, by careful selection, you can get one that's non-corn sourced. And then somebody asked about whole food sources of vitamin C. like AMLA. Those are great, and there's a lot of different products out there which are have food-based vitamin C from different fruits or high antioxidant berries, etc. Um, Great products in general. Pure Synergy, the Pure Radiant C is a good product. The only trouble with it is it's a lower dose per pill, so it's like 120 milligrams per pill, as opposed to you can get a 500 or higher milligram per pill otherwise. So it's just more things to take. And then yeah, the IV vitamin C is very interesting. Um, so if you've done Myers cocktails before, you've done IV vitamin C, you have access to that. If you do get sick and there is an IV infusion center available, that's something to consider. In the anywhere in the 5 to 10 gram or even higher dose range of IV vitamin C. That's something we have routinely used, for antioxidant support, for immune support, and also in some cases for cancer. So certainly a decent option.
So somebody's asking about the vitamin D for immune support. I think that, as we've mentioned before, probably up to 2,000 IU a day is reasonable, but more than that probably doesn't make sense. There's some suggestion it might increase expression of the ACE2 receptor, which is what COVID binds to in the lungs. So we don't necessarily advise that at this time, or higher doses at this time.
Yeah, so we talked about some of the elective procedures, sleep studies, et cetera. It's still a little open-ended on that one. We're kind of in wait and see mode, and if it's not urgent, probably err on the side of waiting until things are more calmed down. I would say overall, encouraging to me to see, that there's, that there seem to be overall less questions coming in. So I feel like just psychologically, I'm hoping that people are feeling a little more settled, a little more lower stress. We've kind of all settled into this new reality for now. And there was one question coming in about herbs that downregulate cytokines, but it doesn't look like a complete sentence. So I'm not sure exactly what the question is.
I'd like to just mention a couple, a couple of interesting studies that I've heard about, and just to keep in mind on the focus. One was on natural killer cells in forest bathers. So apparently there's chemicals in trees that can actually help boost your natural killer cells, and that's one of the types of immune cells that would be helpful for the immune system. But
Nice.
the bigger picture there is that taking that time to get outside if you can, especially as the weather is improving. For city dwellers, it's not encourage. You can't really go drive somewhere and go on a hike in nature, which has been unfortunate. But for people that are close to nature, or just even outside, there's a lot less pollution now, even in downtown San Francisco. So if you just took a walk, if you have some time, you can walk from Soma to Golden Gate Park or something, walk around in Golden Gate Park a little bit if it's a nice day. Getting outside, getting air, getting near trees and a little bit of nature is very important and can really help. There's scientific evidence that it helps the immune system too, which is really good.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Shinrin-yoku is the Japanese term for forest bathing. That's a great point, Ramsey. If you actually, I haven't seen that study with the natural killer cell function. If you could send it over to me, I'd love to see it.
I will do that.
Yeah, that's great. A couple more questions. Excellent discussion there around ACE2 receptors, but also T cell effects of this virus. Definitely does seem to be the case. Melatonin in that regard, and also amino acids have been potentially helpful on a number of pathways. Particularly downregulating inflammation on the melatonin side, and that might be one of the factors that puts older people at higher risk because your natural production of melatonin drops. And as an aside, men do seem to be, being a male does seem to be a risk factor, for more severe, but it's also not clear what that's related to. It might be partly the case that men tend to smoke and drink more than the women. So that was one discussion that was happening there. We're not sure exactly why that correlation is there yet. The herb Sita acuta can be very helpful for protecting the red blood cells. And then zinc, I think taking an oral zinc like a picolinate, but also an ionic zinc, you can use it as a gargle or even a nose spray. That can be helpful. Beta glucans, I like the Zymogen, XYMOGEN brand. Also Now, NOW brand has a good one. Herbs to downregulate cytokines like cordyceps, green tea, Japanese knotweed, Chinese skullcap. Is there any danger of suppressing a robust immune response to COVID? And I'm not that concerned about that. A lot of these herbs are adaptogenic in how they work, meaning they sort of turn the right things down and also either leave the other ones steady or even sometimes turn positive angles up in terms of the immune response and the inflammatory response. So they're kind of like smart herbs. They can kind of go in and follow what the body says it needs in a way. Pretty fascinating. So that protocol of the cordyceps green tea, which has the active component EGCG in it, Japanese knotweed, Chinese skullcap, I think is safe to use, both for potential prevention and also for treatment and trying to decrease the inflammatory cytokines.
There was a lot of talk today about, or this week about the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus looking like or acting like HIV in that it affects T cells. So you might have seen that in the media. Again, it's a little bit misleading because HIV is a retrovirus. It works differently. HIV actually, in fact, goes into a cell, and then you get it's an RNA virus, so that's the amount of genetic material. It makes a copy of DNA, though, and then that DNA gets incorporated into your own immune cells forever. But both viruses seem to be able to get into certain types of immune cells, T cells, and can reduce that count. And so your T cell count. So you might have seen some data on that or newspaper articles on that. And the story is that for SARS-CoV-2, it's a dead end in those cells. It can certainly reduce the number of white blood cells, and any viral infection, not any, but most viral infections reduce your white blood cell count, whether or not they actually use those white blood cells to replicate like HIV does. Influenza does not use white blood cells to replicate, but it does reduce your white blood cell count overall. So a sign of somebody comes in to our office and we test them for, or an ER, you test them with a lab test, or a CBC, and you find the white blood cell count is 20. Well, that's probably a bacterial infection. The white blood cell count is 3.4, and in both cases you have a fever. Well, that's probably a viral infection. So it's a clue diagnostically, but it's also a mechanism in which that virus is working. And many viruses share that mechanism of having a low white blood cell count.
Yeah, that's important.
So food safety, somebody is asking. So actually, I don't love using soap on my food. So there's a number of reasons for that. And one is you're going to be eating soap and having a little bit of digestive issues maybe from that. But I think just rinsing them, you can soak them in some water and then just even a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes, and then take them out, soak them again, maybe do a double soak and use the sprayer nozzle on your faucet if you have one, and then eat them. If you are worried about, I'm eating blueberries, strawberries, whatever we ordered. My wife woke up this morning and when the first thing I saw her, she was on the computer, Costco.com, and we got the delivery already, because if you don't get your order in the morning, it's not going to happen. So so we have fresh blueberries and strawberries from Costco, and I'm just going to rinse them and eat them. And there have been outbreaks of food care handlers, and in the Safeway processing plant, which is the biggest in the country, I think, out in somewhere near Tracy, And so that's a problem. And so there are sick people handling food. There's going to be sick people handling food. And what do you do? Well, if you're really more nervous, go, eat what I call Chinese style. So cooked vegetables. So just cook them, and that will kill, take care of all of the concerns. And then, if it's fruits and berries and things, then just wash them, and remember that that does a lot of good. I have lived in Africa and spent lots of time in Central America, and I did use some peroxide kind of spray or dilute bleach to clean my food there on occasion, but it's not my preferred method of handling things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. A couple of nuts and bolts questions from folks. Herbal companies like Woodland Essence, one of the people mentioned that that's been closed. What I see happening on the Herbal Sources companies that they're kind of opening and closing as they can catch up with demand. So keep calling them back, send messages. And then also send a message to our staff, because we have a list of other alternative herbal sources that we like. I was able to get a mushroom blend and some cordyceps recently from a company called Healing Spirits Farm. And so there, you can find it out there. And then if you are taking adrenal adaptogenic herbs, definitely keep taking those. I'm taking mine, something I think is generally very safe and helpful. Mixed blends like Power Adapt or Vital Adapt, etc., or single herbs, like Siberian ginseng, rhodiola, ashwagandha, etc. Still definitely a positive thing to take. So I think with that, we'll transition over to Lindsay, if you're ready.
All right. Hi, guys. Can you all see this?
Yep.
My presentation? Okay, great.
Yeah, that's good.
So this week I wanted to touch on the topic of stress, which we've all been under for several weeks now at least, but how this can impact eating patterns and our eating behaviors, and then how we can use mindfulness to help mitigate some of these adverse impacts of stress on our food intake. So you've probably noticed one or more times in your own life that your eating behaviors change when you're under stress. For some people, they tend to eat more. This is referred to sometimes as eating disinhibition. And other people tend to kind of lose their appetite and not eat as much. But in our current COVID situation, not only do we have psychological stress impacting our dietary choices, and this has been clearly shown to affect eating behaviors and contribute to choosing unhealthy or more unhealthy foods. But we also have people experiencing all sorts of changes in their routine, which also affects our eating behaviors. And there's, with kids at home, that's changing how people are preparing meals. Some people are finding themselves with not as much work to do and then feeling bored. And I found a study linking boredom to mindless eating and unhealthy eating as well. And I think this is also a valid concern for some people. So basically all these adverse changes to our eating behaviors that can be impacted by stress and boredom and changes in our routine appear to be mediated by a couple different factors. One of them you may have heard of if one of your clinicians at CCFM has talked about the HPA axis, which is your body's primary stress response system. So the adrenals are part of this. And if you've dealt with adrenal fatigue, adrenal fatigue is kind of a misnomer for HPA axis dysfunction. So your stress response system is involved in your eating behaviors under stress. Also, glucose metabolism can change as well. So you may have some irregularities in blood sugar levels. And stress also impacts appetite-related hormones. So I don't know, I didn't get to dive too deep into the research on that yet, but some people, like I mentioned, will feel more hungry, other people will feel less, and this may be impacted partly by changes in their appetite-related hormones. I made a little note down here. While it's very tempting to go after, hyper palatable foods right now, like pizza, pictured here, I think the blood sugar roller coaster that many people experience after eating those foods may actually make your mood worse in the long run. So just something to consider when you're feeling stressed out. So a powerful antidote, I think, to the impact of stress on our eating behaviors is to practice mindfulness. So mindfulness improves how our body manages stress, especially when we incorporate it into our lives on a daily basis. And there's also some specific things you can do, around mealtime and around food to kind of stop yourself when you feel that you're going towards this trajectory of unhealthy eating when you're stressed out. So something I like to encourage clients to do, or kind of train their bodies to do when they find themselves reaching for, really sugary or salty or fatty foods when they're stressed, is to try to learn to recognize those feelings as they're coming on, and eventually learn to kind of slow yourself down when you feel those thoughts and feelings coming up, and to ask yourself a couple questions. One question to ask yourself is whether, are you truly hungry? Sometimes we can mistake hunger, or we can mistake feeling tired, lonely, or anxious for hunger. And you may find that you need to do something to nourish your soul rather than your physical body. And then, if you're able to stop yourself and find that you really are feeling hungry, can you pivot and kind of reach for something that's going to support your immune system and your gut health right now, maybe instead of, a hyper palatable kind of processed food that may feel good acutely to eat, but in the long run isn't really going to support your body. For clients who have trouble kind of slowing themselves down and recognizing, whether they are truly hungry or whether they're stressed, tired, lonely, is to begin a daily mindfulness practice. So if you're not already doing, meditation or some sort of mindful movement like yoga or Tai Chi every day, I'd highly encourage you to start now. I think now is an excellent time to begin that. And there's research showing that as little as 10 minutes a day can actually, move the needle and help people become more mindful overall and reap the health benefits. So you could do this by, starting an at-home yoga practice, or you could download one of the many meditation apps out there like Headspace or Buddhify, or Insight Timer, and start small, maybe with 10 minutes a day. And over time, meditation and practices like this can actually help with certain brain pathways that help us regulate our food intake as well, which is pretty interesting. And I actually, a few weeks ago, found a really cool app called Eat Right Now, which is a mindfulness app that's specifically designed to help reduce the effects of emotional eating. So I think it does require a subscription, but it's pretty affordable. And if you're one of those people who really struggles with emotional eating, or with any other kind of emotional issues around food, I think it's a great app, something you can do before meals, really conveniently at home. And then something else I'd encourage you to do is to have a list of non-food activities posted somewhere really visible in your house. This list should include activities that feel nourishing and good to your body, but do not pertain to eating food. So this is a list you can turn to when you've kind of determined that you're feeling a negative emotion that's not hunger. And this can kind of help redirect the trajectory when you feel yourself heading towards, a pizza binge or something that may not be conducive to health. I recommend writing it down. I think the act of writing rather than typing, it does something to make the list feel more salient. So I recommend that as well. And I have a few more tips for just incorporating mindful eating into your daily life right now. I think this first point here is particularly important now that most of us are working from home and have kind of mixed up routines. And this is to establish set meal times every day. So if you're one of those people who likes to usually eat 3 square meals a day, I recommend that you try to do that as much as you can. If you're one of those people who forgets to eat when you're anxious, I recommend setting a timer on your phone to remind yourself when it is time to eat so that you can make sure you're getting enough nourishing food into your body. The second point here I'd like to make is that it would be great to try to eat with people, whichever people you are living with right now, as much as possible rather than alone. And a tip for people who are living alone right now is to consider arranging a virtual mealtime with friends or family members over Skype or Zoom. So this, you prepare your meal on your own at home and then sit down in front of the computer and maybe share it with your friends or family that way. And just having that community while you're eating, I think feels really, nourishing on an emotional level. I also recommend sitting down in a chair at a table to eat, kind of creating a set routine and rhythm around your meals rather than eating in front of the TV or while you're browsing the internet or, answering emails. Research shows that when you're engaging with technology while you're eating, your brain actually doesn't remember kind of on a subconscious level what you ate as well, and that may lead to more snacking later on. And then, remembering to chew your food really thoroughly. This is crucial for jump-starting the digestive process. And then also managing your environment as much as you can. So if you currently have a lot of tempting kind of junky foods at home, it may be best to either, I don't like food waste, but it may be best to pitch it or to hide it somewhere in your house where you're not going to see it. And this will reduce some of the visual cues that may lead to, to kind of unhealthy emotional eating. A few more last few tips. I found that people who have trouble with getting the munchies at night, wearing blue light blocking glasses can actually help reduce this. And there's not really much clinical research on this yet, but there's some preclinical research showing that evening blue light exposure, like what you get from your phone or computer or the TV, can actually increase hunger and sugar intake in an animal model. So I've observed with some clients and myself actually that wearing the blue light glasses can actually reduce that and maybe help you establish a healthier eating pattern over the course of the day. If you're somebody who's doing a fast between dinner and breakfast the next day, I recommend maybe using an app to track that. I think it helps keep motivation up and the momentum going. So I like the app Zero, but I know Lifomic also has a fasting tracker. There's a bunch of other options out there too. And then last couple things is to make sure at dinner that you're eating a balance of protein, carbs, and fat, and that should help induce satiety and keep your blood sugar stable over the course of the evening and into the next morning so that you're not craving food later on. And then establishing a consistent bedtime and waking time as well can do a lot to help regulate eating patterns. I think a lot of us have probably had that experience where we didn't get enough sleep the night before and then our eating kind of went haywire the next day. So yeah, I think that's my last, almost my last slide. Okay, so back to the topic of comfort foods for a second. Rather than turning to, if you're sensitive to gluten, pizza is probably not a good option. I suggest upgrading your comfort food. So maybe if you want to have something, something sweet or something kind of carby, allow yourself to do that once or twice a week, but make it, try to make it as nutritious as you can. So I put a picture here of gluten-free banana bread that I made. I was feeling like I wanted some comfort food, and trying to make it as nourishing as you can, I think is a good strategy right now. And then two other things, prepping food ahead of time may help reduce decision fatigue during the week, and prevent you from turning to kind of packaged processed foods that may not be ideal for your health. And then keeping meals simple right now. You don't need to be creating Instagram-worthy meals in order to eat well. So I just put a couple examples here of simple meals you could throw together and are pretty nutrient dense and satisfying. And that's all I've got for you guys today.
Great, thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, so these are great suggestions for the current situation that we all find ourselves in, but just, at any time, mindful eating, slowing down, eating in community, chewing your food carefully, really is huge benefit for overall health. And so it's a good time right now to get into some good habits and try to activate that, parasympathetic or relaxation nervous system around meal times, because you'll digest better, you'll absorb more of your food, it'll be anti-inflammatory, etc. So great suggestions. A couple of my other favorite, mindfulness apps, Buddhify, which I think I've mentioned before, Buddhify. Really nice kind of app, elegant interface, and they have meditations for, basically trying to get people to practice some degree of mindfulness within their busy lives. And so they actually have different meditations for eating or for walking or for, even actually, mindfulness exercises for when you're on the internet or when you're on your phone. So it's kind of but the eating one specifically, Lindsay, what you were talking about made me think of that. And actually it's kind of cool because kids kind of enjoy it. You can, have a little meditation playing at the beginning of the meal, and it just kind of encourages everybody to slow down, take some deep breaths, be aware of, the whole supply chain of where the food came from. And right now it's just a really nice thing because we're all really in this together. So feeling those interconnections. HeartMath Biofeedback also has a nice program on mindful eating. So it dovetails well with what Lindsay was talking about. A couple other cleanup on the questions. Blue light blocking glasses. You can go on Amazon and get some, really inexpensive ones. If you ordinarily wear prescriptions, you can get some that are bigger that fit over. If you want something that's a little bit more stylish, also a little bit more expensive, but not terrible, there's a company called Swanwick, SWANWICK, and these really do help to boost your own natural production of melatonin. Other things you can do also are, just turning down the lights, turning the lights less bright in the evening time, and you're just kind of really trying to approximate that old-fashioned situation where we didn't have electricity, we didn't have iPads and phones and computers, and when the sun went down, there was less light, and our bodies are programmed to respond to that. And maybe we were sitting around the fire and cooking our meal, or being in community before going to bed. So feel free to do anything around your lifestyle factors that you can do to approximate, what our bodies really would like us to still be doing. Good. So with that, Valerie, if you'd like to jump in and lead us on some mindfulness exercises, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. I'd very much love to do that. What I'd like to start with, though, is you could lead people through the testing their heart rate and blood pressure and whatnot. That would be great. Then I'll talk for about 8 minutes, and then we'll go from there right into some mindfulness.
Great, wonderful. Yes, so as we did before, for those of us who are with us, we're just going to get a measurement on how stressed we currently feel and on our current heart rate. So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being no stress and 10 being very stressed or extremely stressed, just go ahead and kind of settle in and take a deep breath and just kind of feel how do you feel right now? What's your current stress level? And when you're ready, just give it a number between 1 and 10 and write that down. And then let's go ahead and check our heart rate, our pulse. And so there's, again, 2 places to do that, main places. One is here on the neck. If you can feel with your fingers where you can feel your heartbeat. The other spot is here on the thumb side of your wrist. Take 2 or 3 fingers and just put them into that little groove there between the bones and the tendons, and you can get a sense of your pulse. Either way you like. Go ahead and settle in and find a place you can feel that. And then I'm just gonna set the timer for 30 seconds while you count. And once we're done, I'll tell you to start and stop, and then we'll calculate the beats per minute. So you have a finger on your pulse. We'll go ahead and start counting now. And stop. So go ahead, take that number, multiply it by 2, and write that down. And that's your heart rate in beats per minute. And so those are our measurements before, and then we'll repeat that again afterwards and report back to you on some of that data.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's so helpful to get these measurements. So what I'd like to start us with right off the bat is a simple 15-second reset. And it's based on the work we've been doing over the last few weeks, where we'll do some tapping. So as you may recall, if you tuned in the last few weeks, there's this wonderful karate chop area right through here on this part of the hand. And it's a general area. And if you could take maybe 3 slow, deep breaths while tapping this. And this is what I want you to tell yourself. Think of the number that you just wrote down for your stress level. And while you're tapping, I want you to breathe into that stress number. Just notice it and say to yourself, even though I'm a blank, fill in whatever number you are, an 8 or a 4, even though I'm a blank stress level, I choose to fully and freely accept myself. Just like that. Just 3 breaths. That's all you have to do while you repeat, even though I'm distressed, I choose to fully and freely accept myself. And while you lean into your stress level, that number you wrote down, while you're feeling it, just notice what happens to it while you tap. That's great. That's all you have to do. And if you feel like it, write down another number. And if it's the same, that's really great, because just doing this much primes you to begin to unwind. So as ever, I'm talking about the stress pandemic, and as everybody else on the panel was mentioning, we seem to have moved into phase 2. Phase 1 was the shock, the denial, the immediate transition to a very different lifestyle for most of us. And now we're kind of settled in. I'm thinking this is phase 2. As Dr. Ashford suggested, this may go on for a good year, the way it is, with variations, of course. And while we're settled in to that, more is happening under the surface. And that's what I want to start with. So I'm going to right now talk about the bad news first. Ready? The bad news is that I'm finding every week in this phase 2 of us all being more settled in, just underneath the surface, we're all feeling more tension from the uncertainty of these times. It is fundamental to human nature to need to predict and control our world, and universally distressful when we cannot. This heightens our reactivity. Wherever our fault line is, wherever we tend to crack under pressure, that place within us feels more vulnerable right now. You may notice that at times your friends, family, colleagues, and yourself are more easily triggered. more edgy, maybe more grumpy, maybe more anxious or gloomy, or maybe eating or drinking a bit more alcohol or coffee in order to better cope with the pressure. So, you ready for the good news? Here it is. The good news is that we can gently unlock and release this internal pressure every day. It doesn't have to build up and dominate our well-being. However, it will need a daily practice given the times. And I'm a big fan of daily practices being easy enough to do, especially when you're feeling low, flexible enough to fit into any schedule, and swift. I like practices that take moments rather than minutes, or minutes rather than hours. And it's got to be potent enough to make an immediate difference. So today you're going to experience how easy it is to make a new habit, and you'll leave with safe, practical tools to ease tension as needed. So the frame I want you to consider is how we usually think of stress as one overwhelming tidal wave that has the potential to swamp us, to just really knock us down or bowl us over. But in fact, we can separate stress into 3 smaller waves that are quite manageable. These separate waves are worry or mental reactivity, anxiety or emotional reactivity, and stress or physical reactivity. When we take these one at a time, they're far easier to reduce. So the first small wave, mental agitation, that includes racing thoughts, intrusive thoughts, repetitive thoughts, destructive what-if thinking, catastrophizing, those kind of worrisome merry-go-round thoughts. We know that it's worry because it tends to not be very inspiring or solution-oriented, and it does not solve problems. And that's the worst thing about worry. Our worried thinking often tricks us into believing that it's helpful, but it rarely is. So we tend to buy into it. We tend to accept it without questioning and tolerate this slow drip of sweetened poison to our well-being. Worry fogs our brain, clutters our brain, it distracts us from the present moment, and it prevents real problem solving. Another problem with worry is that it can be sneaky. Worry is subtle in how it can quietly consume us without our even noticing that downward spiral. So the first key is to notice our worried thinking. We get intellectually curious. We want to study it. We want to know how it works through us. Paradoxically, noticing worried thoughts without responding to them, just watching them race through our brains from a place of non-judgmental curiosity is what neutralizes it. And that's because of the prefrontal cortex, right behind our skull here. It's a part of our brain that generates the mental activity of self-observation and self-reflection, and this is incompatible with the instinctual, semi-unconscious worry that comes from our amygdala and limbic system, which is more kind of between our ears. So it's important to remember there's 2 types of thinking. We've trained our prefrontal analytic brain. Society supports that type of thought. We typically have never been trained to even notice how very different our limbic-based emotional thinking is. It serves a very different purpose, but because it's been ignored, untrained, undisciplined, we A, confuse it with rational thought, B, give it the same authority as analytic thought, and C, never question it. So emotional thinking and anxiety can run wild with fear, concerns, and so forth. But when our prefrontal attention focuses into it, it stops it cold. It's like a teeter-totter. When focused awareness about our emotional thinking is high, the impact of those same worrisome thoughts will be low. Just noticing our instinctual anxious thoughts slows them down and puts us back in the driver's seat. When we observe our mental agitation without reacting or buying into it, it fades and our wise adult minds become in charge. So, what to do? Take charge of your worried, reckless, runaway thinking. First of all, it's super easy to build a list of what you can do to disrupt and redirect your worried thoughts. Write it down in advance, so when you get swamped with intrusive thoughts, you can grab your list and follow your own good advice. Some simple ideas are the old 12-step thanks for sharing, you say to your worried thoughts, and then you redirect your focus to what's positive. Looking at photos, making photos, watching a sunset, calling a friend, reading a good book. Disrupt and redirect. And set daily limits on news from TV, radio, internet. That's just feeding the fire. And best of all, find your favorite funny YouTubes and spend an equal time laughing. The second key is to notice our anxious emotions, our fears, our fretfulness, feeling dread, helpless, hopeless, trapped, stuck, frustrated. Now, we often confuse feeling and thinking, and that prevents us from taming either. And it's vital to be able to discern our emotional reactions from our emotional thoughts. Noticing the emotional symptoms of anxiety without reacting to them automatically allows them to begin to release and relax. That's what mindfulness practices are all about. Our focused adult brain and noticing brain is the only tool we have to calm extreme emotion. So it's so important what to do, set internal boundaries with our anxieties. Terry Real talks about internal boundaries being like the skin on an orange. It does two things at once. First, the outer part of the brightly colored skin repels stuff coming at it from the outer world, bugs, bacteria, that kind of thing. And it protects, and that's like our outer boundary, how we protect ourselves from being around noxious people. But the internal boundary is like that thick, white inner skin. It kind of contains us and reins us in. And that's what we need to do with our anxiety. We can contain it and rein it. And believe it or not, that calms it. It doesn't repress it and cause more problems. For example, best example I can think of is a drunk at the bar. Some guy who's hitting on all the women and trying to cause bar brawls with all the guys. He's totally unreined his emotions. It needs to be disrupted and redirected out of that bar, Or it's like a tantruming child. If a child gets away with a tantrum, if you just let them tantrum, what they've learned, A, is it's okay to tantrum, and B, that next time it can be bigger and sooner. So it's about reining things in with mindfulness and being gentle. So what to do, how to do that, really is a mind hack. You remember that you live in an emotional biosphere. You've got to live internally with what you dump into it. So have some filters, be discerning, be like a caring, firm inner parent that's setting limits with your younger, more scared emotions. Set wise limits. The third key has to do with the physical symptoms of tension. So instead of stewing or suppressing, overriding, or ignoring the physical stress, we sit with it with curiosity and acceptance. We feel into where the physical stress resides in our bodies. Do we have a thundering heart, a knot in our throat, shortness of breath, watery knees, butterflies in our stomach? Just noticing and breathing into the physical symptoms without reacting to them automatically allows our bodies to begin to release those emotions. So how to do that? This is a super simple mindfulness exercise. Take 30 seconds, pause, breathe into those physical symptoms. Really lean into them rather than trying to override them. Place your hands on the area that's stressing and simply tell yourself, this is, whether it's your racing heart or knots in your stomach. Simply say, this is, while you lean into those sensations. You don't have to fix it, judge it, repress it. Take those 3 slow, deep breaths into that symptom. And the purpose of this is that it's you claiming your wholeness, flaws, symptoms, all of you. It's you being in charge of caretaking your well-being, managing tension rather than letting it run wild. So you get the big picture. Mental, emotional, and physical noticing builds up our observing self, which strengthens the muscles of mindfulness, objectivity, empowerment, self-control. It's like social distancing. It's good to distance from our reactivity. That develops a secondary awareness that automatically slows down that reactivity, whether it's worried thinking, anxious emotions, or stressful physical discomfort. Now it's time to see for yourself exactly how well this can work for you. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. And if you don't want to close your eyes, just simply gaze down into your lap or your hands. And then I'm going to ask you to come up with some memories of recent moments of difficulty. And please take care of yourself, set limits, and find the right size chunk. No need now to go for the biggest trauma of your life. Keep it a manageable sized piece for the purpose of learning some new skills. Keep it real, but keep it on the just right size of your personal challenges for the sake of being in this classroom right now. And as ever, when we do mindfulness exercises, be light and easy with yourself always. No self-judgment, no harshness, no self-shaming. Be kind, practice compassionate curiosity with yourself, explore. Be like a scientist in the lab. Be a dispassionate observer of your own reactions. Be like a young, innocent child filled with wonder and enthusiasm for discovery, and simply notice what is. There's no need to rush in and change what you observe, but there is a big need to simply observe and calmly accept without being pushed around by what you observe. And we're going to discover the 3 keys that unlock the 3 obstacles that prevent you from staying in your peaceful, energized center. So in just a few minutes, by 12:30, you'll be empowered with new ways to return to your resilience no matter what. As with all new tools, you want to practice to get proficient. So please make a commitment to yourself that this week you'll practice once a day. If you do, after a week, you'll be inoculated against the extremes of stress reactivity for good. And again, what we're about to do is going to be kind of like social distancing. You're about to discover just how to take a few steps back and use mental distancing, emotional distancing, and physical distancing from our own reactivity. So take a minute now to get comfortable. I'd invite you to uncross your legs, because in a few minutes when you're more relaxed, you'll want to do that anyway. If you got anything on your lap, put it on the floor or table. Chewing gum, mints, you can put those out too. Make sure your phone is turned off so you know you won't be interrupted. And as you get settled, start by taking those cleansing breaths where you breathe in as slowly and fully and deeply as you can, in through your nose, and steady, calm stream of a releasing out breath through your mouth. If you feel like it, you're welcome to pause between the in-breath and the out-breath. As you breathe in fresh, cleansing oxygen, filling your belly, feeling your ribs and lungs expand. Focusing your mind into watching those physical sensations as the air flows out over your lips. And notice how your mind automatically sharpens and focuses the more steadily and slowly you can breathe. And the first key we're going to explore is mental distancing. I want you to notice your anxious thinking. Of course, that's head squirrels, racing brain at 2 a.m., thoughts that take over when you're driving in your car, first thing in the morning, last thing at night. Go to an image and a memory of when you were feeling and thinking really stressful thoughts. And take your time. Maybe it's the first one that jumps into your head. Maybe you'll sift and sort for a moment and find a couple others. Just one you want to work with today. It could be the worst one. It could be the most common one that comes back, like an unwanted visitor again and again. Just look at that memory from the outside as it solidifies. kind of like looking at a photo. And then become the memory in the first person. Allow yourself to feel it, but also stay a bit above it so you don't overwhelm yourself. And lean into your worry. Just notice your anxious thoughts. Ask yourself right now, what story am I telling myself? Ask yourself from your observing brain, your mindful brain, are these thoughts caring or accurate? Take a deep breath into that memory and those repetitive thoughts. And with your mindful brain, ask, is this thought helpful in any way? Can it guide me? Are these racing thoughts problem solving? Are they useful? And also, who did I know growing up who talked like this out loud? And as you notice those distressful thoughts, I want you to take a deep breath and thank your anxious, worrisome thoughts for trying so very hard to get it right. Let your chatterbox brain know that you appreciate the constant work that it does. Be benevolent and kind towards what many call our monkey brain. You may have these merry-go-round thoughts, but they're not you. You are you, not your thoughts. Feel that difference right now. Step 6 feet back from your agitated thinking. Use mental distancing. Really notice how your chattering thoughts are not you. Your monkey brain may try to trick you into thinking that you are your fretful thinking, but you are not. Feel that fully. Breathe into that now. And the next time you hear your anxious, worrisome thoughts, say a friendly hello to them. Be a bit amused by their antics. They're a very young, energetic, meddlesome guest. They're just a sweet visiting child who needs your reassurance. You're more like that loving but firm parent that can set limits, give guidance to this worried younger part that is constantly overthinking. The second key is emotional distancing. So emotion, I'm going to interchange with anxiety and all the other negative, tense emotions that go with anxiety. So once again, return to the same image, the same memory. Breathe into it, explore it a bit more, or perhaps, if you'd like, choose a new one. Doesn't really matter. Just feel into that memory, look at it, and then become that anxious, emotional memory. And what's inside those anxious feelings for you? Like Russian nesting dolls, each emotion carries other reactive emotions inside of it. Be curious and explore. The pieces just keep getting smaller and smaller as you take them apart and look at them with curious compassion. Each one of those worrisome emotions deserves credit because, after all, they're just trying to protect you or keep you safe or help you out in their own possibly immature and definitely misguided emotional way. Thank those negative emotions for doing their job and be generous towards them. They're a part of you, but they're not you. You are you. Feel that separation and that emotional distancing right now. Take 6 steps back from your anxious emotions and allow yourself to appreciate them for what they are and what they do. So the next time you feel reactive emotionally, say hello to those tense emotions and, like a very generous bed and breakfast host or hostess, make your fears a nice cup of tea. Plump up some emotional feather pillows so your anxieties can have a relaxing snooze. Tuck your fears in with a nice warm Afghan quilt. After all, Emotional anxiety is just like having your very dear, very difficult, fretful senior citizen relative come to visit. Remember how he or she would just go on and on about things. Be as calm and patient with your anxiety as you would be with her or him. And the final third key is physical distancing. Here you get to notice the physicality of your stress. Where do you hold stress? Once again, breathe into the image, the memory of that stressful time. Just notice it and become part of that memory in the first person, in your mind's eye. Just notice the physical symptoms. Do you have shortness of breath, tight jaw muscles? Do you have flip-flops or butterflies in your stomach, knots in your throat? Maybe just a fast heartbeat. But breathe into where it is in your body. What sensations do you notice? Are they tingly, heavy, cool, or hot? Where is that same physical feeling in other parts of your body? And scan your body. Where is there no stress sensations in your body? Where do you feel ease, warmth, healthy, relaxed sensations? But above all, thank your body for doing such a good job in containing all that physical stress so well for so long for you. Breathe gratitude into those places that carry the physical stress. Isn't it marvelous how your body can do that? You have these bodily sensations, but they're not you. You are you. Feel how separate and how distanced you are from your physical stress. Next time you notice those stressor sensations, welcome them with a caring stretch or self-massage. Take a few deep breaths. It really is just like finding an old friend at your doorstep who is just ragged with exhaustion from patiently carrying a heavy emotional load for many, many miles. Your stress deserves some care and pampering from you. So now you notice how you feel. Take a deep breath into that. Now that you've practiced mental distancing, feeling compassion while standing 6 feet back from your worried thoughts. You've practiced emotional distancing, which is just kindly observing your extreme emotions from 6 feet away. And physical distancing. You're giving some TLC from 6 feet away to the stress that your body registers. And now I want you to go into your favorite place. Just pick a fresh memory of a place that makes you feel good and is beautiful to visit. It could be the first one that pops into your mind. It could be the same one from our prior weeks, or it could be a brand new one. It doesn't really matter. Just enjoy the peace that you feel when you're there. Take in all the scenery and beauty around you. Breathe into the fragrance, the scent that's so unique to this place. Perhaps you can hear the soothing sounds that are so relaxing and remind you of exactly why you love to come here. Above all, take in that perfect weather, which is just right for you. Body and soul feels so good. Now I want you to take 2 slow, relaxing breaths where you're breathing in the peace and beauty of your favorite place. And knowing that the good energy of your favorite place will continue to support you with every breath you take, while you let this imagery fade from your mind's eye and return to your awareness of being where you are in this room, this place, And then taking all the time that you need. Whenever you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Great.
Thanks, Valerie.
Oh, you're so very welcome.
Welcome back, everybody. So we would love to let anybody who wants to chime in offer some, offer their experience. Before we do that, let's do our data collection real quick. On a scale of 1 to 10, just write down how stressed you feel, with 1 being no stress and 10 being extremely stressed. And then when you're ready, when you find your pulse, we'll go ahead and check our heart rates. Again, side of the neck or wrist by your thumb. I'll say when to start, which is in 3, 2, 1, start counting. And stop. Okay, go ahead and write that number down, multiply it by 2. And the link to log these numbers is on our webpage. If you go to ccfmed.com, I'll copy and paste it to the Zoom chat also. Or Christy, if you could do that, if you could put it into the Zoom chat. There it is. So if you're able to just click on that link, it'll take you directly to the survey where you can enter the pre and post data. For some reason, it doesn't allow me to, so you can also go to our website, ccfmed.com, and then click on the COVID-19 resources and scroll all the way down to the bottom. And go ahead and enter your data. Yeah, Valerie, I love that image of just getting a little separation, getting a little distance between, because we get so attached to our thoughts and our stress and our beliefs and our anxiety, and it just kind of takes over. We end up being in our head and being really distracted from what's happening in our body. But just getting that little bit of separation, that little bit of distance to get some perspective and kind of,
Yeah, that's it exactly. Mindfulness puts a wedge between our reactivity and who we are. And it's really important to feel that, to reset our center so we don't get pushed around by whatever types of stress may be facing us.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. And it's so important to separate out, we say, oh, I'm anxious, I'm stressed, I'm freaking out or whatever. But really, it's important to look at it. Is it thinking? Are you having, stressful thoughts? Or is it more of kind of a body rush? You just have overwhelmed with the symptoms of stress so that you can't even think, or are you on an emotional roller coaster? Usually at any given moment, where one is predominant over the other. But just observing and trying to analyze which is going on is going to begin to reduce it and tame it. I probably mentioned this before. I love the Chinese proverb that says, even thieves behave when the policeman is in the marketplace. And our noticing brain is that policeman. Mischief to our nervous system, to our immune system, our stress level, just ain't going to happen in the same way it would if we're not noticing it. And neurologically, it seems to be incompatible. The more we're able to be mindful and notice, that we just switch gears. It really is like a teeter-totter, you know. But when we let it run away with us, then we forget to be mindful. So.
Yeah, nice.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a few minutes before we're going to wrap up for today, but would one or two people like to chime in? If you do, just go ahead and unmute yourself, and welcome to join us and give us some perspective.
Yeah. Questions, reactions, what worked, what didn't work. I'd love to hear it. Or you can go into the chat. We could look at chat as well.
Looks like we might have some pretty happy campers. Everyone's kind of doing all right.
Yeah, everybody's so relaxed, perhaps. But, you know, you're really free to, you know, offer feedback at any time.
Absolutely.
Through CCFM or through my website. I'd love to hear from you about this. If this
Absolutely.
is helpful.
Yeah,
What's
likewise.
working. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining. You know, for everyone in the audience, if you want to invite people to join us next week, you're absolutely welcome to do that. Even if they're not a formal patient of CCFM, we definitely consider them part of the community and friends and family. They can, you know, just go to the website, click on the COVID-19 link, and then the link for the webinar. It will allow them to register. Other than that, please stay safe out there. Enjoy whatever aspects of this situation that you can. Always try to find that silver lining. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Wonderful. Thank you.